The celestial archives had existed since before memory itself, a vast, sentient pathway that stretched across dimensions, testing those who dared walk its length. Every species in the known galaxies had sent their champions, their wisest, their strongest. The path would twist and reshape itself according to the walker's nature, revealing truths about their species, their potential, their place in the cosmic order. For millennia, it had never aligned the Zenthari, with their crystalline minds capable of processing 1,000,000 thoughts simultaneously, had sent their greatest philosopher. The path had fractured into infinite branches, each one a different possibility, until the philosopher stood paralyzed by choice and was consumed by indecision. The beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form eons ago sent their eldest sage. The path had simply disappeared beneath her, offering nothing to one who claimed to need nothing. The Kethri hive, billions of consciousnesses acting as one, sent 1,000 drones moving in perfect synchronization. The path had split them apart, scattering each drone to a different timeline, teaching them the bitter lesson that unity without individuality was merely uniformity. One by one, every species had failed. The path remained warped, twisted, a labyrinth of cosmic judgment that none could navigate. Then came the humans. Helen stood at the entrance to the celestial archives, her breath fogging in the strange, dimensionless air. Beside her, Arthur checked his equipment for the 3rd time, though both knew that nothing they carried would matter once they stepped onto the path. "They think we're going to fail," Helen said quietly, glancing back at the observation platform where representatives from 200 species watched with barely concealed disdain. "They think we've already failed," Arthur replied with a crooked smile. "We're the species that still dies from simple diseases. We can't process information like the Zenth. We can't transcend matter like the We're not even unified like the Kethri, so why are we here?" Arthur shouldered his pack and stepped forward. "Because someone has to be stupid enough to try." Helen laughed despite herself and followed him onto the path. The moment their feet touched the surface, the archives came alive. The observation platform erupted in surprised chatter. Sensors indicated the path was behaving differently than it had in recorded history. Instead of immediately warping, it seemed to wait. Helen felt it beneath her feet, a pulse like a heartbeat, ancient and patient. The path stretched ahead of them, silver and shimmering, but stable. "It's not changing," Arthur whispered. "Not yet," Helen agreed. "Keep walking." They moved forward together, and with each step, something extraordinary happened. The path didn't warp to test them at a line to meet them. Where the Zenthari philosopher had faced infinite branches, Helen and Arthur saw only the one path ahead. When decision points appeared, they didn't freeze in analysis paralysis. Arthur would shrug and say, "Let's try left," and Helen would nod, or suggest right instead, and they'd choose. Imperfect, quick, human choices. The path accepted each one and solidified beneath them. Where the Verlac sage had found emptiness, the humans found substance. They were beings of matter, of flesh and bone and blood. They hungered and thirsted and tired. When the path offered them a test of transcendence, inviting them to shed their physical forms, they declined. "We like being us," Helen said simply, and the path rippled with something that felt almost like approval. Where the Kethri had been scattered, Helen and Arthur remained together. They argued about which direction to take, about whether to rest, about whether the strange fruit growing beside the path was safe to eat. They didn't share thoughts perfectly. Arthur couldn't read Helen's mind. and she couldn't anticipate his every move. They were two individuals, separate and sometimes at odds, and the path loved them for it. "Do you see what's happening?" The Zenthari observer whispered to his colleagues. "The path isn't testing them for what they could become. It's accepting them for what they are." The humans walked for hours, then days. They slept when tired, ate when hungry, helped each other over obstacles. Arthur told terrible jokes that made Helen groan. Helen sang old Earth songs that Arthur didn't know the words to. They were imperfect, inefficient, beautifully, stubbornly human, and with each step, the path aligned more perfectly. The celestial archives had been waiting. Observers realized with dawning wonder, waiting not for a species that could transcend their limitations, but for one that could embrace them. Not for perfection, but for persistence. Not for unity of mind, but for unity of purpose, despite difference. When Helen and Arthur finally reached the end of the path, they stood before the archive's chorosphere of pure knowledge. Every secret of the universe contained within. The Zenthari had sought to absorb it all. The Verlax had tried to merge with it. The Kethri had attempted to distribute it across their network. Helen looked at Arthur. "Should we?" Arthur studied the sphere, then shook his head. "We'd just mess it up, probably. Besides, I don't think that's the point." "What is the point?" "That we walked the path and didn't let it change who we are." Helen smiled and turned away from the sphere. Together, they walked back down the path, which remained perfectly, impossibly aligned beneath their feet. Behind them, the celestial archives pulsed with contentment for the first time in eon. The path had found what it sought not in beings of crystalline thought or pure energy or perfect unity, but in two humans who embraced their flaws and walked forward anyway. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, not because humans were perfect, but because they had learned something every other species had forgotten. The point of the journey wasn't to transcend the path. It was simply to walk it together as themselves, and that had made all the difference.